Welcome to Extra Takes, hosted by Northland Church Senior Pastor Dr. Joshua Laxton. Join us each week as Pastor Josh reveals the rest of the story behind his sermons. We'll discuss how those who follow Christ can live out a biblical vision for the church in our world today.
Well, hello, Northland family and friends. Welcome to another episode of Extra Takes. I'm your co-host, PJ, back with my original co-host, Matt Shiles.
Thanks for having me back.
You're welcome.
I was afraid.
Well, Lauren did a really good job, even though she didn't give me a list of questions.
We heard some good feedback,
Yeah.
but I think she made you nervous.
I didn't know what was going to come out. And she had a little computer over there.
Yeah.
I did not know what was on her little computer.
I think-
At least here I know what's on it if I needed to reference it.
You don't look at it.
Well, nah. But,
I think she got through more questions than we normally do.
oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, she did let me expound on some things, but
Yeah, I think it's a bit of different when, you are doing a Q&A
yeah.
with somebody who's the subject matter expert,
Yes.
as opposed to you spending however many hours, 20, 30 plus hours on a message, right? So I think it's easier for you to expand, on all the points a little bit more.
Right. Yeah. So it was good. I enjoyed the different gear.
I did too.
And now we are back into the regular gear.
Yeah, I did too. I know we're going to try to get Lauren and others to co-host through the year and
Okay.
keep you on your toes.
Keep me on my toes.
Yeah,
I like it.
Can't let you settle in too much.
I like it. But no, this past week was the first time I preached a regular service in over 3 weeks.
That's a long time.
Because even Christmas wasn't regular. It was a regular sermon, but it wasn't like a, yeah.
It was a little shorter than
It was a little shorter than normal, trying to get through it, but it was so much there. That's why we did an extra take segment around it.
And you
but
preached
now,
about hell.
And that's pretty. Yeah, well, we ended with hell. It's hard. It's hard for it to be good news if there's not bad news.
All right, we're done.
There we go. Happy New Year. No, I guess we can stop saying Happy New Year. It is the 21st.
Yeah, so is it too late? Too late to say Happy New Year?
Maybe you get till the end of January. Maybe first month.
Have I told you about my theory about New Year's resolutions?
No.
I start on February 1st.
Huh. Okay.
It's too hard to do them in January.
Why?
Because it's so busy in December, right?
Okay.
And you're already skeptical.
I'm very skeptical.
Very skeptical.
I think it's an
January
excuse. That's like
is-
Quitter's Day.
No, I get past Quitter's Day. I make it past Quitter's Day.
What?
What? So why do you think Quitter's Day happens? You think it would be the same if everyone started February 1st?
Well, no. Here's the thing. I think Quitter's Day happened whether it's on January 10th or whether it's July 1st.
Maybe.
Quitter's Day happened because you quit.
Maybe.
Because there was no intentionality, there was no discipline, there was no plan. And so when you have no plan, when you have no direction, when you have just an idea that you want to try, I want to try. And this goes back to the whole idea, try versus train.
Yeah.
When you have a plan and you know where you're going, and there's a reason for that plan. What is your reason? So like for me right now, like I really would love to lose 10 pounds. But so I work out, I'm in good cardio shape. I feel like, I probably could lower my cholesterol according to the doctor, but nevertheless, I fit into my same clothes that I've always fit into. So I have to, what's the reason?
Sure.
So I'm lifting, and so I feel like I'm strong. So while I would love to, there's no plan because I don't need to. See, and that goes back to that idea of need and believe.
Sure.
So that's where I'm like, I think the reason why Quitter's Day happened is that you really don't believe that you need that. And so whether it's January 10th or whether it's, like I said, July 1st, the reason why there's quitting is because there was never really an aim. There's never a why. What's the ultimate purpose of that aim? And even if you had an ultimate why and where you were going and why you were going there, then you need a plan and you need to be disciplined to sticking to that plan. Because here's the other thing that we're going to, this is why I believe this, I didn't even know this was going to lead into the actual series idea, but that this is the whole idea, is that do you really believe you need that?
Right.
And do you really believe in what you're doing to actually accomplish that?
Sure.
Because, as we'll see in the coming weeks, believe, like to actually believe, it's not as easy as you think it is, because it's not like, oh, well, I believe, as if something shifted in your mind. No, if it really does shift in your mind that you believe in that, then it actually begins to have movement with your life. So that's where believe is never this non-movement idea. And so that's where I'm like, yeah, so that's the reason why Quitter's Day, July. So that's where I'm like, I'm just shaking my head going, well, you can wait till February 1st.
So my reason for that is it gives me time to develop a plan.
Well, shouldn't you have done that like November, December?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think December is so busy that so often we don't have the space to develop the plan. So I give us the space in January.
So what you say is that when you really develop your plan, come November and December, your plan's going to go out the window because you're going to be too busy to enact it.
Oh my goodness. No.
You just said you're too busy to plan it. Well, if you're too busy to plan it, you'll be too busy to execute it.
It takes different energy and space to plan than execute.
Okay, maybe for Matthew.
This is taking a different turn. This is good. 6. You are feisty today. I'm excited now.
I like to push back.
Let's go. I know you do.
I do. I mean, have you really thought through it?
I have. Yeah. It's helpful. It's helpful to start February 1st and January 1st.
Okay.
Gives me a little bit more space to give me an opportunity to succeed.
Okay.
Because it gives me time to plan.
Okay.
Because of the busyness of the year. We'll end it at that. Well, oh man, I want to keep going on this topic, but we're going to move on. So let's look at this week, because in this whole series, I know you're really excited about Believe. And this is going to be a whole 4 weeks of some fun material. And we'll get into kind of what that means for where we are here, obviously looking back, and then what this will position us towards in the future, because I think that it really does. But this week was January 18th and 19th, 2025, and the series Believe Greater Things in Greater Days, and we were in Exodus 1 and 2. So specifically Exodus 1, 8 through 13, and Exodus 2, 21 to 23. So the main point, you said it 2 different ways. Need is the prerequisite of belief, and also need precedes belief. So the outline, you started with this idea of the background of the series, why this series, and in the context of you being here for 3 years now, celebrating your 3-year anniversary coming up, kind of where this falls in that history. And then we got into this idea of we all have needs, and you laid out peace, redemption, and purpose. We'll talk about that. And then you talked about what we do when we realize we have needs. And there's kind of 3 typical responses that humans do. And then you left us on a cliffhanger.
Yeah, I normally don't leave on a cliffhanger. I knew that this series was basically going to be cliffhangers.
Oh,
really? Yeah, I mean, because next week won't be as much of a cliffhanger as this week was.
Yeah,
but it really does, and a lot of my series builds, but you can in some sense build individually.
Yeah,
but this really does build upon something.
And I heard you say that because of that, if you miss a week, you really need to catch up.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Because you ended with, here's the question you need to ask: what will it take to believe?
Exactly.
And that's next week, and then even the following week, you talked about, sounds like we'll unpack how it's tough to believe.
Well, it's tough to sustain that belief.
Okay.
So once you get to a place where you believe, like again, that's hard, and that's where I'm gonna, and that's why I wanted to do, I had this series in my mind, my heart, for a very long time. But it's not until I actually begin to really develop it does the details come together. So,
sure, yeah.
So as I was developing it, I'm like, well, I think it's actually good, at least for the first couple of weeks, to focus on these 3 entities.
Sure.
So you have Egypt, Pharaoh, Israel, then Moses. Yeah. So because they represent, in some sense, 3 different types of groups, and in some sense 3 the needs that we saw, and then also even the responses that you give to these needs that are perceived. But then you also see the difficulty each one of them has, and we'll unpack that of even believe. But then when they all converge together, because that's what's going to happen in Exodus 12, they're all going to converge together because they're going to move out. They're going to move out of Egypt. But that's when in week 3 we're going to see it's actually hard to sustain belief, and not everybody makes it.
Sure.
And so you just feel like, this is so good for not only individual believers, and it's not like this series can apply to and that's why I know you didn't mean to, but the whole idea of New Year's resolutions,
sure, yeah.
it really applies there too. You have a need. So your need precedes believe. So
sure.
So now you have a need. Now you're going to perceive. Okay, what. But then once you find something to believe, then there's going to be movement. You're going to enact something. But then the question is, can you sustain it? Can you sustain it through all of the obstacles, opposition, all of that?
Yeah.
Because not everybody weathers belief. There's always the tendency to relapse into unbelief. And so that's where I wanted to set this series up because if we're going to regain and reimagine and dare to dream again and believe God for a vision for Northland, we're gonna follow this pattern.
Yeah.
Well, we need Him, but and this is where I just want to clarify, because at 11 o'clock, sometimes I've already thought about it so many different times, and I say it, and I'm like, oh, well, that probably didn't even make sense to most people.
Okay.
Because I said, half the people of Orlando has needs. And so, and people are like, well, doesn't everybody have needs? Well, yes. But over half don't know Jesus. And so what we're trying to do, I'm trying to set up is that these are 3 essential needs that every human being has. Redemption, shalom, peace, and purpose. And so if you have half the population of the Orlando metro area, they don't have a relationship with Jesus, well, then they don't have their 3 essential needs truly met. And so that's where I'm like, so if we're going to believe God for greater days and greater things, to not only understand the fact that He's already met us and met our greatest needs as human beings, but now He wants to use us to meet the greater needs of the people living here in Orlando metro area. Okay, we got to believe. And so that's what I was trying to get at the very end. And so I was going really quick trying to end. And so I'm like, well, I bet you half those people didn't even catch that. So, but they will be explained on the 4th week.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to maybe, I think you said week 3 when you talked about, it's one thing to believe, it's another thing to sustain that belief.
Yeah.
Because that's something that we're gonna need. You talk about the long term, the next 25 years. It's not just something, hey, we've got it. All right, now let's share it with others.
Well, right. If you look at, and that's part of why I always want us to remember where we've been as a church. Because what you see, here's the thing. What you see, even in the last 15 years, we didn't sustain something.
Yeah.
There was a lot of transition. There was a lot of hurt, heartache. There was a lot of confusion. Again, it wasn't functioning, wasn't flourishing. And there are a host of reasons for that. Don't want to get into them because we have now moved into a new day, new season. But that's where, for me, and how I'm wanting to be used to help Northland, is that this 25 years, it's not about me, and it isn't really about us. It ultimately is about the Lord and what He wants to do, because we know His desire. And so if we can have an understanding of not only our need as a church, that we need this, we need God. And then at the end of the day, now others need God too. So now how do we take that and flesh that out in a way that is sustainable? And that only happens when you know where you're going, you know what you have to do to get there, and you know who the one it is leading you there. And so you can then sustain that. So I just don't want us, and that's where I don't want us to flounder 5 years in, 10 years in, 15 years in, 25 years in, because then what we would, when another person comes on the scene, so like when Joshua takes over the mantle, actually we'll probably end with Joshua in chapter 4. Well, we will see the transition between Moses and Joshua. So now he's given the baton, and now he enters into a season of vision.
Sure.
And it's a little bit different than what Moses did.
Yeah.
So, but they were all connected. So that's the goal.
Awesome. So the first question I had, just specifically or just generally for this series, you talked about this transition that we're in, and you've said maybe we're about halfway through. This series in this year with this series really feels like it's a bit of a pivot point.
Yeah.
Where we can look to and dream about the future intentionally now that we've all of the work that we've laid, like you said, year 0, 1, 2, and now 3, with the transitions, the made for mission, the new mission statement, the new visions. All of that was really hard work, but that was a bit of the foundation. And now this is allowing us to pivot a bit to now, for the first time, I think in a while, dream for the future. Is that accurate?
Yep.
So as we're doing that, we're still building the systems and structure. So what does that look like? How do we continue to balance that, the reality of us building the systems and structures while also looking to the future? Because it does feel like we're still in building mode. And I know we'll always be that way in a little bit, but
well, let's take renovating a house.
Okay.
For an example. All right, so if you go into a house and it has a lot of mold and it has a lot of dilapidated structure, or let's just say like a hurricane's wiped through, and so so there might be a more intense rebuild just to get some of the structure where you can live back in your house.
Yep.
Okay, so once you get that kind of structure finished and you can kind of move back in, then you might still need a tweak. Maybe you need some new cabinets. Maybe you need to repaint. Maybe you want to, lay new flooring or whatnot. And so there's still, but all of the solid structures there, but you still have some minor structural things, but you can do that while you're living there at a good, healthy pace.
Sure.
Whereas all of the stuff that Northland had been through, and especially COVID, where you really saw across the board just a lot of structural, when I say infrastructure from an organizational standpoint, damaged or dissolved through that. So and then when you add all of the transition too that Northland had encountered prior to COVID, there was again, that's where we spent year 0, 1, and 2, very intently and intentionally focusing on these larger structural issues.
Sure.
So that's where I'm like, we haven't arrived. There's still logistics, here and there. Definitely some more systems and processes, structure that we need to tweak, maybe even possibly add. But the big pieces we believe that are there, which allow us now some room to go, okay, what do we again, we're starting to believe now. Again, now what people will see, we've already begun to build these buckets of what we're believing God for, and we already have some traction. But now we can now put this out and go, this is what we're shooting for now.
Sure. And so we can start living in the house that we've rebuilt. Yeah. I love that.
So it is a pivotal year, but I hope people, a couple things I hope people took away from the introduction is that we're really thinking intentionally and methodically through that, through this plan. maybe there's some business leaders out there, or maybe you want to start a business one day, or maybe you lead a nonprofit of your own. I mean, those 5 elements every organization needs.
Yeah.
When I teach organizational leadership from a Christian perspective at the graduate school at Wheaton, I mean, these are the 5 elements that I teach, and they're all embedded within God's framework of not only creation, but also how He sets up Israel, and then later on the church. And so it's there. But then, for me, adding that clarity, alignment, processes, systems, you got to get those. Like, if you don't get those, I mean, those are the essential elements of this process. Because if everybody's not clear, well, then you're going in however many directions you have people.
Yeah.
Because there's no clarity, and then alignment. You got to bring people underneath that of understanding. Now, not only they know where we're going, why we're going, but now they are aligned. Their heart, they're all in. But then you're adding the infrastructure of systems and processes in every department, every arm that you have. And then once you get there, so I actually have a whole nother chart to show people on week 4.
Okay.
Or in week 4, that actually has a lot more detail to this kind of image I showed on week 1.
Okay.
But once you get those 3, then you can enter into a momentum phase. But that's not the last phase. And even multiplication isn't the last phase. The last phase is movement. Is that you have created something that truly will outlast you.
And at that
that's
point,
the goal.
It's uncontrollable.
And it's uncontrollable.
Yeah.
And that's the goal. I mean, that's ultimately what God has envisioned with His church, is that He's the one who ultimately controls it. Human beings don't. But they have worked in, here's the mission of God, here's what He's all about, here's the vision, here's what His people do, and then here are the core values that govern. I mean, the core values are like the Beatitudes. These are the values, the way of life that govern the people, the house. Then there's the structure, the roles and responsibilities of the people that are leading and the people that are working. You got the structure, and then you have the strategy. What does it look like to implement that here? So you have all of that. But I want to show a little bit more in depth on or in week 4 about how those all play together, and as we unveil the strategic vision of the next 25 years.
So you're going to give that to us now?
No.
Oh, we got to wait?
Yeah, week 4.
Okay. I'm trying.
Nah.
I tried.
Week 4.
Okay. So let's look at this first point. We all have needs.
Yep.
Under that, you took us through these 3 questions. What do you fear to lose? Where are you enslaved? And are you stuck? Each of those connect to our 3 essential needs: peace, redemption, and purpose. So for each of those, I'd like to go through each one of them and just talk about, you laid out, for the first one, what do you fear to lose? You laid out fears, and then you gave, you gave this statement, whatever you fear to lose reveals needs in your life. So then you gave us this list of needs. So then the same with enslaved and the same with stuck. So which of those, whether under the fears list or the needs list, do you want to maybe drill into more?
Well, we can go either way you want. I think about, when I think about what do you fear to lose, I remember watching the show Biggest Loser.
Okay, yeah.
Years ago, we watched it. I mean, for a long time in terms of the seasons, and they would always interview these contestants.
Yeah.
And it was always they're doing it because they were afraid of something. They knew that if they didn't change, then they would lose their life or lose their family, or their family would lose them. It was all around loss. And I definitely think that human beings, there's always a fear of losing something. And the thing that I really wanted to draw out, which I found fascinating, is that you have the most powerful man on planet Earth who was actually considered a god incarnate.
Yeah.
He has a fear. And which is yeah. And it's this where like our God, our King has no fears. That's why he's always saying, "Fear not, fear not."
Yeah.
It is the greatest command, the most given command that God gives of His people. Fear not. Why would He? Because in Him we don't lose.
Yeah.
And but here's the thing though, we have to lose to gain. Because Jesus says, if anyone is afraid to, lose his life, he actually will lose it. Because if you're trying to do everything to gain your life, you're going to lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake, you're going to find it. So that's where there are no losses. And now some people would say, well, I'm going to lose, my family someday because they're going to die, because of sin. But this is kind of where I'm really I know we're getting into the second point too, but I'm wanting to stress the fact that as human beings we have a fear of loss and a host of fears, but it is in Jesus though that all of those fears are calmed. Because He has purchased the losses that we have encountered through sin, through through our fallenness, and so anywho, I mean, when I look at the list though, I'll because I want to apply it to the church, so. I definitely think change is a big one because change is a loss of something. You are losing, because that's where change. So change is situational. Transition is psychological. So change, something, a situation, a circumstance has changed from what it was to what it is, and so but that change means loss. Now, sometimes people might actually, there are times where people might actually enjoy the loss, so they don't mind the change.
Yeah.
But in the church world, change is really hard for people. So when you change leaders, there's the loss. Well, I really like that leader. I like what that leader did. I like what that leader said. I liked how that leader taught. I liked everything about that leader. Well, now I have a leader, and
what he's loud. What they allow.
Oh, I thought you said he's loud, because I did hear that early on. I don't hear that as much anymore. Yeah. But I was like, well, I thought you said he was loud. But that's what I heard. Loud, and I talk fast, and so there's this big change that happens. So there's this loss.
Well, and that's interesting because the transition series.
Yeah.
How many weeks did we do? 17. And it was planned on how many? Like 12, or it wasn't planned for that many, was it? When you started out?
Well, when I started,
I thought we kept extending it.
We did keep extending because I wanted to try to touch almost every kind of transition in the Bible.
And the fascinating part, living through that, I look back and I'm like, 17 weeks, that is so long. That's such a long series. But we needed that.
Yeah.
Right? We didn't need a 4-week series. Within the context of transitions equals this idea of loss, and we had to have time to process all of those things.
Right.
So given that context of that massive of a change that we've been going through, 17 weeks isn't that long at all.
Oh, no. Well, and then when you look at change, all right, so if you fear to lose, and the fear is change, then you might fear to lose control. You might fear to lose certainty, because now things are uncertain with this change. You might fear to lose consistency, because everything was consistent, but now this change is now kind of maybe inconsistent, or you're having to learn the new rhythms or the new consistency. And so there's a lot to change in churches. And I've always, I've always, over the years, I've learned it's easier to add new than it is to change existing, because there's this newness that a lot of times people like new.
Sure.
But as long as you don't change what is.
Sure.
And so,
interesting.
So change is really, really hard for people. I mean, if you look at our nation over the last, 50, 60 years, there's been a lot of changes, moral changes.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of even political changes over over the years, and so that has created a lot of instability. There's created a lot of kind of a loss of control. That's where I even talked about losing ground in culture. The church has lost ground in culture, and there's still the church. I mean, even if you look at the election, not to get political, and obviously people don't. I always like to get biblical, but being biblical is political, and the reason why I say that is politics just simply means a way of life. And so there's a book by John Howard Yoder that talks about body politics, that Jesus had an ethics. He had a politic, a way of life, which actually contradict or was, which was contrary to the way of life, even as, kind of in Israel at that time, but obviously in the Roman Empire. So I want people to realize when people say, well, the church shouldn't be political. Okay, political in the sense of I don't believe that we ought to necessarily be picking and choosing sides per se. I believe we always should be on the side of Jesus and just say you ought to be on the side of Jesus. It's interesting in Joshua chapter 5 when the angel of the Lord's army shows up, and Joshua's like, who are you for? You for us? You for the enemy? And Jesus, because it's basically a Christophany. And that just means an appearance of the pre-incarnate Jesus, and Jesus, the angel of the Lord's army, says, neither. Like, you ought to be on my side. That's what we ought to be. But nevertheless, I mean, when you look at all of the changes, I mean, there's a loss of ground. There's been a lot of changes, a lot of new people, because in some sense we're not populating America, through births. We're actually, populating America through immigration. Well, that scares people. There's a loss there. And that's why we ought to value life. God values life, so we ought to be pro-children, not pro-choice. I digress.
Well, just on that politic for a second, I really think that that's a very helpful way for us to think about it. That Jesus has his own politic.
Yeah.
Right. We talk about the kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven, and in our mind, politics, especially in America, is one side or the other, and we have to continually reframe it, right? To show when you introduce this new concept, Jesus has his own politic, it allows us to reframe and say, actually, I'm choosing Jesus.
Yeah.
And then it reframes the way I view this two-party system.
Yeah.
Right. So this has to be done over and over and over again. But you introducing that concept, I think is very helpful for us to continually consider, because that's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, the election happened, the inauguration happened yesterday, but that's an ongoing thing.
It's an ongoing thing, and and that's where the church ought to be consistent. So while our culture and our particularly national scene of politics, while there's always going to be an ebb and flow and a changing, it should be the church that's consistent all the way through. Because
that's a compelling vision.
Well, I mean, it should be. That's why we ought to be the calming presence in our culture, and that we don't there's so much there, and we're not the church in a divided democracy has passed. We're now in believing what God wants to do through the church, but I will always draw us back to Jesus. And for me, I will say this, and we'll move on. I know that I have to be extremely intentional with my words. If I ever want, I posted something, Martin Luther King Day, or so Monday, and the inauguration day. So I know that I have to be very, careful, because it's so funny, and this is what I heard it even today in a staff meeting I had. There are some people that think I'm left leaning, and there are some people that think I'm right leaning, and that just means I'm Jesus leaning. Because I really do. I really believe that with all of my heart. You will not be able to pin me down. Sure, did I vote for somebody? Yeah, I'm not going to tell you who I voted for, but because I want to participate in being an advocate for the common good, but I'm also going to make sure that ultimately I'm advocating for the kingdom of God in breaking, not in American politics, but in the church.
Amen.
And I think that the kingdom of God has been actually lacking in the church for quite some time from a general state. And so I just want to make sure that I'm calling us, those who say we're part of Northland, we're all in for Northland. We want to be a presence for the common good, but ultimately the only way we can be a presence for the common good if we're ultimately a presence for the glory of King Jesus.
Amen.
And so just constantly drawing us back to Him.
Amen.
So
funny story about that. So Kate, our oldest, who's 6, just wanted us. Who'd you guys vote for? Who'd you guys vote for? When you get older, we'll talk to you more about it. Just tell me, the boy or the girl? You don't have to tell me the name. Just tell me the boy or the girl. And then after the election happened, okay, are you happy or sad? We're not going to talk about this. So, but yeah, I think that can be. That's the messy middle, right there. When you're talking about some people see it this way and see it this way, and I do think actually this relates to this series in the next 25 years, because you talk about relapsing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the consistency of it. Ooh, we have an opportunity. We have a tendency to relapse into our, cultural identity, our identity politics.
We're going because you're trying to draw me into saying something else, and I don't want to say it. I don't want to say it because I don't want any emails.
We'll move on. I
don't want any emails.
Well, this is a pretty good viewership.
It is.
They're pretty kind and encouraging.
They are.
Yeah. All right, so the needs, we talked about what do you fear to lose.
Yeah.
Let's talk about enslaved and stuck.
Yeah.
Anything there under redemption and under purpose. What I think is so helpful, before I let you go, what I feel is so helpful for each of those, and specifically with fear to lose that we already talked about, was keeping in mind the essential need for each of them. So like for peace. So as you're talking about what your fear is, and what your the control is, whether it's position, power, stability, certainty, ultimately it's peace is what we're after. So these other two, for enslavement and being stuck, what we're ultimately after is redemption, and what we're ultimately after is purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to redemption, where do you need redemption? I mentioned generational curses, and somebody emailed me and said, "Hey, can you explain more about that?" Because sometimes I think it can be taken to an unhealthy conclusion. But I do think that there is an idea of generational curses per se from an overall human standpoint of a fallen world. I mean, there's this generational curse of sin.
Yeah.
But then can there be in more micro situations in families generational curses? And I'm not thinking, I'm not thinking of curses in terms of voodoo, witches, and all that's not. But in terms of this cycle that isn't broken, maybe a cycle of addiction that continues from one generation to another.
Yeah.
Maybe a cycle of poverty from one generation to another. I mean, so there are some things that, because of the fallenness of a family member, and because that cycle was never broken, there seems to be, in some sense, this enslavement to this thing. Whatever that thing is for families. And so I actually do believe that there are things like that. I mean, because you can even have a generational curse of what a man is perceived to be, and it can be very domineering, misogynistic, and all of that, and it's just passed on.
Sure.
And they never have a vision of what a man is after the image of Jesus.
Sure, yeah.
So that's where I'm saying, like, so you have the, since the capital G and C generational curse of Adam,
The macro.
and then you can have more of these micro scenarios where it just just passes on from one family to another because of the fallenness and brokenness. And unless something breaks that cycle, and that's the thing about Jesus, he breaks the cycle. He breaks the cycle.
Yeah.
And because he redeems, he delivers, he gives a clean slate, he forgives, he renews, he restores. And so that's what I really meant by, kind of generational curses, but it's not like there's this, a family and that's this family is like a voodoo doll that is just always just cursed and nothing can ever happen. It's just really more around sin and the enslavement to sin that has enslaved that family for generations.
Yeah, the brokenness that has been passed down through the modeling.
Yeah,
good, bad, or ugly,
yeah.
And we have a different model in Jesus, regardless of what we've experienced. So that's the. We can end there. That's all we need right there.
There you go.
Good news of Jesus. And for some, it depends on the depth of that depravity that you've experienced, right? But the deeper that depravity, the better the news is.
Well, yeah, and this is part of where the deeper that depravity, the deeper the darkness of in some sense the curse of sin on that family's life. And again, this is what we see. I'm going to give you a little bit. Why not? You're welcome.
They want it.
You want it. But when you look at so one of the things that I'm going to look at in this coming week is depending on how deep you are in your worldview or how deep you are in your enslavement will determine how much it really will take for you to believe in this new. So like you take Pharaoh in Egypt, they're already rooted in this worldview. You take Israel, and then, when this kind of this opportunity to believe in something new comes in, hey, we're going to free you, and then they get hit with harder oppression, they're driven even more into the depths of their enslavement, and they don't want to believe. They're like, well, hey, leave us alone. Listen, it was better before you got here.
Sure.
And so that's kind of where, it's really, really tough. It's really tough to break the curse of sin. It's really tough to break the curse of the broken worldview. You know what I'm saying? So that's why it is. It's tough. And that's what, and that's part of where the Spirit of God, the presence of God has, again, what will it take to believe? And that's what we're going to flesh out, next week. But
I think that leads us well into this idea of stuck. So that's where purpose can really
and this is where purpose is, and because this is where and that's why I said I want Moses' life to really preach for the church, because this is where most churches are. And again, this is a series. This is more of a corporate series, but I am trying to apply it holistically, which is why I spend the time that I do unpacking this. But there are a lot of churches that get stuck. But obviously, there are a lot of individuals got stuck. I was talking to someone earlier today where one of my family members said, man, I'm on this merry-go-round. And I get it. A lot of Christians live on the merry-go-round. They feel stuck. And here's the thing. They do a lot of good things. I think that's why Moses' life preaches to us. But I will let me say this too about Moses, because I talked about Jethro. Now, so what's interesting, so for you Bible students out there, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, actually has two names. One you actually see in chapter 2, which is Ruel. And then he's also referred to as Jethro later on. So so what people believe is happening is that Raul is basically his name, and Jethro is more of this title, because it is believed that Jethro is kind of this title he was given of excellence and abundance, and because he was also the priest of Midian, so he was kind of like this leader. So he has basically two names. I just have always gravitated towards Jethro because I'm from Tennessee. because of Jethro Bodine. But if maybe if I came from a Spanish background, maybe Ruel would be, and I don't know. So, but it is funny. He has two names, but I mentioned Jethro, and he actually also has the name Ruel, which is what we are introduced to in chapter 2. But nevertheless, you have Moses, and he finds himself in Midian, where he never thought he would be. And that's because I've taught on Moses since I've been here, and I talked about the 3 seasons of Moses: Prince of Egypt, in the wilderness, midlife crisis, and then the convergence stage, where he's converging the Prince of Egypt and the lessons he learned in the wilderness as a shepherd, and he's bringing them together to be the deliverer and shepherd of God's people. So, but it just took him 80 years to do both. But he gets into this second 40, and he's really, really struggling. And you're going to see him. You're going to actually see Moses struggle even next week in chapter 3 and 4. He does not want to go back. And that's where but here's the thing, he struggles, but he doesn't want to, he just in some sense it does seem like this is what he just believes that his life has become. And I think that there are so many churches that feel like this is what their life has become, and they just really give up for God's best. They really give up God's ultimate purpose in their life. I think there are a lot of individuals, they feel like maybe for failures or mistakes of the past, and you're like, man, you know what? I don't deserve another chance, or God's done with me. And it very, very much seems to be Moses's at least mindset that, hey, man, I'm done. I got the, I kind of got this life going on, and by all accounts, it's a good life, but I'm a stranger in a strange land. This is not where I'm supposed to be. This is not my people. This is not what I feel like God had put in my heart. And it also seems like he's distant himself from God too. I mean, and so that's why it's hard for me. Like, I've been listening to some messages, and there was one that talked about like waiting, for God. And I'm like, I don't think Moses is even waiting on God. I mean, again, not to get ahead. I mean, he sees a strange sight, and God starts talking to him, and he's like, who are you? Who do I tell people? Like, it's not like he was waiting on, because if you have somebody like waiting on God, be like, finally, you showed up. Where have you been? Yes, I will go. I've been waiting on you. Where you been? But no, I mean, that is not Moses. Moses is so reluctant, as we'll see next week. But it shows that what we see in chapter 2 has really set him in this rut, this stuck place where so many people get, where they're living. And I wanted to show it, but because I love just bringing things back from the past. But you remember when we were talking about purpose with Abraham, when God broke silence with Abraham, we talked about primary purposes and secondary purposes. So you really have a primary purpose, and then your secondary purposes feed your primary. Well, what we're seeing is that Moses doesn't have a primary purpose anymore. And see, I think that there are a lot of churches that they fail to realize what their primary purpose is, and they do a lot of good secondary purposes. So they do a lot of, so they have corporate worship, but I want you to understand, corporate worship is not our primary purpose. It's a secondary purpose that feeds a primary purpose. Small groups, that they're secondary purpose. They're not the primary purpose. So that's why you have to understand, what is God's primary purpose? What is he doing? Because then your secondary purposes feed that, right? Well, so Moses has these secondary purposes of being a husband, being a father, being a shepherd. And again, they're all good things, but they're not feeding his primary purpose of what God had given him as a redeemer, as a deliverer, to lead God's people and to establish God's people here on earth. Like that was his purpose. And so he's in this period of life where he doesn't know how to marry and integrate his secondary purposes with his primary. And so that's where I'm like, if you can learn what God's purpose is in your life, and then take your secondary purposes. And here's the thing, is that there might be a season in your life where you're without a job. Well, but that's the secondary purpose. And so you can learn to be content when you have a job, when you don't have a job, because you're content in the fact that God's going to work through you when you have a job, when you don't have a job. Because your primary purpose isn't the job. Your primary purpose is to be part of God's kingdom, his people, reflecting and representing his glory, his characteristics, his attributes in all spheres of life. So anyways, that's what you got going on with, kind of with Moses. And those round out those three essential. And I didn't do such a deep, so let's put it this way, I did a deep dive, but I have not exhausted it. But I really believe, though, if I went to exhaust it, that the big buckets of peace, redemption, and purpose will fit any category that we have needs about. So for one, think about health. We all want good health. Well, what is that? That is you fear the loss of health, and so therefore you fear, whether it's death or not being able to do whatever it may be. But so therefore you have a need of peace, shalom, where your health is one day fully restored, which then leads to that second big idea. What do we do when we realize we have needs? I love this. I don't know. I don't know if it was as impactful as I hoped it would be in terms of setting out the three things that human beings typically do when they realize they have needs.
Yes. So those are, some people believe within. That's Pharaoh in Egypt. Some people cry out for something or someone greater to believe in. That's what Israel did. And then what we were just talking about with Moses was some people just be. And they basically just give up on believing. And that's where Moses was stuck.
Because now you look at it, all right, so you have these needs. Because this is why like needs precede believe, because you when you realize you have these needs, you're going to like, all right, I've got to look, how do I solve this need? How do I meet this need? Well, so that's with Pharaoh and Egypt. They're going to look within. We got a framework here. We got a religious worldview of a framework. Here's what we need to do. Hey, we're mighty. We are the greatest nation on planet Earth. We ain't going to let these people, jeopardize our power. We're not going to let them jeopardize our control. Hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to formulate a plan, and we're going to oppress them. We're going to marginalize them. We're going to psychologically get in their head, realize, helping them see that don't you even try any funny business because of who we are. And so they're going to, temporarily, and this is the thing, they're going to temporarily meet this need. Now, and this is why I mentioned it's only going to be temporary.
I think that was helpful, and
this is what we're going to see next week, is that Moses is going to come on the scene, and he's going to be the conduit by which God demonstrates the fact that Pharaoh and Egypt cannot solve their ultimate issue of peace. He will destroy, here's what ultimately is going to happen to Egypt. God will actually destroy that nation. They will unravel from that moment. They will never. Here's the thing: they never recover. They never recover, because think about it. So when I say they never recover, is they no longer become the mighty from a biblical standpoint, and then you can even go from a historical standpoint.
Power,
They never recover from that because other nations come on the scene. Now Israel will come into a golden age. I hate to even use that term now, but Israel will enter into a golden age with David and Solomon, and they will have rest from their enemies. But then because of their disobedience, God will raise up other nations, and so you will have the Assyrians, then the Babylonians, then the Medes, Persians, then the Greeks, then the Romans. The Egyptians never come to power and never become a superpower. Now they might be when I say a decently strong nation today, but again they have never recovered the world dominance that they want. God destroyed them.
Wow.
And so that's where, like, temporarily they met their needs. So as human beings, yes, temporarily, like, yeah, can you meet your need for health? Temporarily, absolutely. Do all the things. Man, go Whole30, work out, be mentally, sound and tough, and do soul care, and you can be healthy temporarily, but one of these days you will die. It is only Jesus who has promised holistic shalom through what he has done through his death and resurrection. And so that's why one of these days he has promised to give us a new body. Now again, they're all, when you look at these three essentials that we have as human beings, these essential needs that we have as human beings, they all overlap, just like the Trinity overlaps. They're three distinct, but they're all embedded. In some sense, they're
concentric circles.
Yeah. But yeah. So you can meet your need. You need money. Okay, meet your need. But one of these days you will die, and you won't take anything with you. But you might meet your need of money, but you might lose your job tomorrow, or something might happen in the stock market. Hey, you might even put all your money in Bitcoin, in the digital sphere. Who knows? Who knows? You might lose all of that. But that's where you might can meet it temporarily, but for eternity, for everlasting from everlasting, it won't last.
Yeah.
And so that's what Egypt and Pharaoh, that's what they're going to realize, kind of next week. And so that's why as a church, I want us to realize, like, we don't need to look to our own power, our own ingenuity, our own intellect, and what we can do in our own power. Because, while we might be able to meet the temporary need, will we be able to sustain that? And really the answer is no, which is part of why only God can sustain what he gives. And what he oversees. So that's why I always say that when the reason why churches die, the same reason why individuals die, because of sin. At some point, I think churches ought to constantly be revitalizing, and the revitalization that they all ought to So I say that revitalization is to churches what sanctification is to individuals. So as long as we are being sanctified more into the image of Jesus, and Jesus is our center focus, we will be shaped and formed more into the image of Jesus. So revitalization is the corporate form of sanctification, is that we as a corporate body are constantly being revitalized more into the body of Christ, so that we might reflect more of who he is. And I think at some point, churches take their eyes off of Jesus, even though you say, well, nowhere else don't you know? I can. Maybe your eyes are on tradition. Maybe your eyes are on a model. Maybe your eyes were on a person when it should have been on Jesus. I can give you at least 7 different sins that churches commit. Maybe you had the sin of apathy for the Great Commission because you didn't really want to reach people far from Jesus. You just wanted us for and no more. And so I'm going to tell you, God's going to take you out of business if you're not going to participate in his ultimate purpose for why you're here. So that's what I'm saying. You look to your own little temporary needs and try to meet them as a church.
Yeah.
But you ain't sustaining them.
And what I'm hearing from you is that temporary could even last a lifetime. But not eternally.
Well, right. And what could last? Well, here's the thing. What you see with churches from a corporate standpoint.
Yeah, I mean individually.
Well, individually, it could last a lifetime, but it comes to an end. But here's the thing, though. I mean, certain needs. Maybe money. Maybe you can sustain your need for money for a lifetime.
Sure.
Okay, but that's one need. But what I would say is that's a secondary need and not a primary need. Yeah. So
that'll help to reveal other things.
Yeah. But nevertheless,
that's the danger we have in America is the ability to meet a lot of our needs temporarily.
But you think you take Pharaoh, you take Egyptian, it's one of the things that they would do to these, pharaohs and those of nobility. They would bury treasure with them because they thought they could take it into the afterlife. Okay, maybe you have that worldview. Christians don't have that worldview. You don't take anything.
Yeah.
And that's where Paul talks about in Corinthians, is that at some point your works how well you worked ultimately for the Lord will be determined by what happens in the very end. Where you work, so wood, hay, straw that was easily burned up, or really did you invest, in kingdom and everlasting eternal things. So, anywho, but no. So some people believe within, and hey, I can meet these needs by myself. Don't need anybody else.
So let's look at believe in, and I feel like we covered B pretty well. So
yeah, well, and that's where with Israel, what am I going to believe in? Because we can't do it on our own. And here's the thing: they probably there may have been something to the reason why Egypt and Pharaoh were afraid.
Yeah.
Because if they would have come to some kind of a reason, see, that's what Moses was thinking too. He's like, man, if I kill this Egyptian, and I go to my Hebrew brothers the next day and say, hey, you see what I did for you? Yeah. He thought he could have led a rebellion, but after the Pharaoh and the Egyptians enslaved them, marginalized them, oppressed them, and worked them to death ruthlessly, they also did some damage psychologically, where they didn't think that they could, and so they're just crying out because they're like, we can't solve this issue
to anybody.
Is there anybody out there that can solve this issue? So yeah, they're not crying out to the Lord. They're just crying out, is there anybody out there that can hear us, that can do something about it? And that's where for us, I mean, as a church, and this is part of where restoration comes in. So there are times we get in our life where we might become enslaved to a sin. We might find ourselves financially bankrupt, and we're in need of renewal. We're in need of restoration. So in some sense, redemption, renewal, restoration, they're all in the same family. But that's where I'm saying there are some times where believers, or obviously even churches, can get into another pattern of enslavement, and so they need renewal. They need restoration. And so here's the thing. Can you do it yourself? I mean, you can try. You can try, again, going back to a Pharaoh and Egypt, you can try, but it would be better served if you can find someone, and that someone being Jesus, the Spirit of God, that will come within you, that will be the presence from the outside that can come inside you and do something greater, and that is sustainable over the long term. And so that's what's a big, huge point about believing in Jesus, rather than believing in a new pastor, believing in a counselor, believing that this new job is going to solve all of your ills, believing that, hey, if we have a baby, maybe our marriage will get better. I mean, like, don't believe in the wrong thing. And like we'll see next week, believing even in the right thing is not easy. Sure. Because there's going to be, because the whole idea of belief, so that y'all know from a theological standpoint, and hopefully you saw this with the definition, is believe is the same thing as faith.
I did see that.
I mean, so we're just using believe. I mean, so because when I do that framework, the worldview framework, and I say, what's faith?
That's what you say.
It's
faith,
believe. It's believe. It's confidence, trust in. Yeah. So that's what believe is. I mean, believe is faith. Is that you're believing in something, even though you cannot even see it sometimes. But what we like to do is we like to believe in something that we can see. Sure. We like to believe in something that we can feel. We like to believe in something that in some sense has at least a track record we can see, like Pharaoh and Egypt. Hey, we got a track record right here, man. Look how big and bad we've been for a long time. So but that's the idea, kind of there.
So that last one is with Moses. One thing I want to say about that is you talked about contentment, and you gave it a distinction with contentment of it's not just it's when you have a lot or when you have a little, but this idea of, but we shouldn't be content spinning our wheels doing secondary good things. when we were missing the primary thing he called us to. So talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so and this is where I go back to those, primary and secondary purposes.
It's helpful, yeah.
Is don't be content doing nothing but spinning your wheels with secondary purposes while you neglect or you don't know what your primary purpose is.
Yeah, that's not what we're talking about when we're saying being content.
Yeah. And so where Paul's saying he's learned to be content whether or not he has any of these secondary purposes or even in these secondary needs. Right, because again, they all, so you might think you have a need for money, but you really don't need money ultimately. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is where I feel like our faith is tested. And I was talking to the staff about this in our all staff meeting. Do we really believe if the scriptures talk about how Jesus is better than life? Do we really believe that? Do we really believe that Jesus is better than life? Mm-hmm. Because if we really believe that Jesus is better than life, then he's better than any of the secondary elements that life produces, like money. So he's better than money. Mm. He's better than health. He's better than everything. And from a biblical standpoint, we actually know why. Because through his death and resurrection, he has ushered in new creation. One of the biggest things that I learned, there's been a couple of big things that I've learned over probably the last year. Let me go ahead and give those to you, and this can be kind of wrapping up. So the two biggest things that I have learned that I will never forget that God, I believe, has revealed to me over the last year is one, this notion where every human civilization has set up gods as a way to appease them in order to pursue their own self-glory. Mm-hmm. Like that came from Genesis 11, where they created the ziggurat, created this temple to appease the God, to reach the heavens, and the whole reason for that was so that they can make a name for themselves. Yeah. And so that was even America's framework when they were founding the nation. Is like they're just God. Their mascot of a deity was the God of Scripture, but they were using the God of Scripture to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, not for his glory, but for theirs. Now, sure, were there Christians, at the inception of our country that really pursued God's glory? Yes, but I'm talking about it as the founding of a nation. That's the reason why America will not live forever. One of these days, the kingdom of God will come, and the kingdoms of this world will become the kingdom of our God. So, I will, kind of never forget that. But even coming out of that, you have the primary purpose and the secondary purposes, and and the fact that we always have to maintain: are we doing what the Lord has called us to do? And are we primarily being driven by what is primary to Him? Yeah. And so those are kind of two things that that I will I won't forget that I will continue to really embrace those as a pastor and helping people see those things. And
those will keep popping up.
And those will keep popping up. So.
Awesome. All right, that's a great way to end. I think you've already given us some good teasers for next week.
Yeah, I've given you a lot of teasers. What you'll see. Yeah, well, what you'll see in those teasers is, all right. So I've teased it out a little bit, but then you'll see how I put it together from a framework perspective of how we, So I'm looking forward to that. Well, so Northland family and friends, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Extra Takes. Until next week, blessings.
Thanks for listening to Extra Takes. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you won't miss a single episode.